The human knew what he had done. He knew he had crossed the line, that he had made himself an enemy to rules and reason. But when he looked down at Lyra, clinging to him as if letting go would mean death, he knew he could not take it back. For, the first time in his life, he stood against everything, against his own people, against hers, against the entire weight of order and alliance. "I won't let her go," he said firmly, his voice shaking but unbroken. "Not now. Not ever." The room erupted into chaos. Officers shouted, soldiers moved closer, and tension filled the air like fire ready to ignite. Yet in the center of it all, the human held her tighter, her silver eyes locked on his, her smile, faint but burning with a courage that matched his own. Whatever storm was about to break, they would face it together. And for the first time, he realized, this was no longer just about loneliness or comfort. This was love. And love was worth every risk. The moment of defiance did not last long. Soldiers tore Lyra from his arms, dragging her out of the room while she screamed his name. He fought back, but human officers restrained him, their hands gripping his shoulders with iron strength. His voice cracked as he shouted, but the door sealed shut before he could reach her again. Silence followed, heavier than anything he had ever known. They locked him under guard, confining him to his quarters. He wasn't treated as a criminal, not yet, but his freedom was gone. Days passed like shadows crawling over his walls. No Lyra, no silver eyes, no quiet laughter, no smile that lit the darkness. Just emptiness, raw and merciless. Rumors reached him through whispers from guards. They said the Zari Council had demanded she be taken back to her chambers, away from human influence. They said her family was furious, that she was forbidden from ever seeing him again. Some whispered that the alliance itself might shatter because of what had happened. Each word was a blade. Each passing day was a weight pressing harder on his chest. He replayed that last moment again and again, her trembling body in his arms, her voice whispering, "I choose him." And each time he remembered, his resolve grew stronger. He didn't regret holding her. He didn't regret defying them. The only thing he regretted was letting them take her away. Then one night, as he sat staring at the lifeless datapad on his desk, the door slid open. He froze. There she was. Her breathing was ragged, her hair unkempt, her robes torn slightly at the edges. She had escaped. Her eyes darted around the room, wild with fear and determination, and when they met his, she dropped everything she had carried, small scraps of fabric, a stolen keycard, and gave him that smile. But this time the smile was different. It was not shy, not nervous. It burned with fire. He shot to his feet. "Lyra, how did you—" She ran to him before he could finish, throwing her arms around him. He caught her, holding her tightly, afraid she might vanish again. Her whole body trembled against him, but her voice was fierce when she spoke. "They cannot stop me," she said. "They cannot choose for me. If I must lose family, lose name, lose world, then I lose. But I choose." She looked up at him, silver eyes glowing even through tears. "I choose you." His heart slammed against his ribs. The words felt impossible, too heavy for the fragile air. Yet they were real. She had risked everything to come back. "You'll be hunted," he whispered, his voice breaking. "If they find out, they will," she interrupted, her grip on his shirt tightening. "But I am done hiding. Done being silent. I would rather fall than live without this." Her words shook him to his core. For so long he had been the one afraid of rules, of consequences, of the weight of two worlds pressing down on them. But here she was, an alien princess, standing against everything she had ever known just to be with him. And in her fire, he found his own. He cupped her face gently, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "Then let them come. Whatever storm follows, we'll face it together." Her lips curved into that smile again, softer now, but no less powerful. It was the smile that had first broken his loneliness, the smile that had carried them through. Whispers and warnings. Now it was a smile of defiance, of freedom, of love. She leaned her forehead against his, her voice steady. Together. Outside, the station remained a nest of tension, soldiers and officers preparing for the fallout. But in that small room, none of it mattered. They had already made their choice, and for the first time the human felt no fear. Not of exile, not of betrayal, not of war. Because in her arms, he had found something greater than all of it. Something worth every risk. The storm was coming, they both knew it. But as they held each other close, they also knew this. Storms could not break what was born in fire. The storm came faster than either of them expected. By morning, the entire station knew. Zari guards searched every corridor. Human officers argued. Behind closed doors and whispers turned into open accusations. Some said war would come. Others said the alliance was already broken. But in the middle of all that chaos, one human and one alien girl held on to each other, refusing to let go. They were found quickly, of course. Soldiers stormed into his quarters, weapons raised, voices sharp with threats. But this time, when they ordered Lyra to step away, she did not move. She stood tall beside him, her hand locked in his. "I choose him," she said again, her voice steady, echoing through the room. Gasps followed. For the Zari it was unthinkable. For the humans it was dangerous. But the words had already been spoken, and they could not be taken back. The human stepped forward, his heart pounding like a drum. He looked at the faces of officers, soldiers, leaders, all people who saw their connection as wrong. His throat felt dry, but he forced the words out anyway. "She is not property. She is not a tool for politics. She is a person. She has the right to choose." The room fell into silence. No one had ever dared speak like that to both sides at once, but he had nothing left to lose. For a long moment, no one moved. Then arguments erupted. Angry shouts in two languages, demands for punishment, threats of broken treaties. The air was fire and steel, and yet something had shifted. Some humans looked at Lyra with new eyes, seeing her not as an untouchable princess but as a girl who simply wanted freedom. Some Zari lowered their weapons, doubt flickering across their stern faces. Because what she said, what he said, was not just rebellion. It was truth. The council convened. Hours stretched into days. He and Lyra were kept under guard, but never separated again, perhaps because even the soldiers felt the weight of their bond. And in that time, the story spread beyond the station, to other ships, to other worlds, to anyone who would listen. An alien princess and a human worker, standing against the will of two civilizations, not for power, not for conquest, but for the right to choose who to hold, who to love. When the final decision came, it was not what anyone expected. The Zari Council, under pressure from their own people who now questioned the old ways, declared that no one, not even those of noble blood, should be forced into bonds without choice. The humans, wary but watching, allowed it. Not because they fully understood, but because the seed of change had been planted. It was not peace, not completely. Tension still lingered, whispers still followed them. But they were free, together. When Lyra returned to his room that night, she carried nothing in her hands. She dropped everything she had once been, titles, duty, expectations, and she smiled at him. That smile was no longer shy, no longer fragile. It was radiant, full of love and fire. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if the universe itself could not break them apart. And for the first time in his life, he felt something greater than survival, greater than duty. He felt purpose. Because in her, he saw what humanity brought to the stars, not strength, not weapons, not wealth. Humanity brought stubbornness, the refusal to let go, the belief that even in the vast emptiness of space, love mattered. Years later, their story would still be told, not as the tale of a treaty broken or a scandal whispered, but as the beginning of something new. A reminder that the galaxy was vast, but hearts could be vaster still. And every time the human remembered that first night, when the alien girl walked into his room, dropped everything and gave him that smile, he knew. That was the moment. His world changed. That was the moment humanity truly found its place among the stars, together. Always together. The human clenched his fists, trying to hide the storm inside. He wanted to argue, to tell the officer that Lyra was not just some rumor or rule broken. She was something more. But words failed. He only nodded and walked away, his stomach heavy with unease. That night when Lyra came, he almost told her to leave. Almost. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the door as she entered. She dropped a small pouch she had been carrying, and as always, she smiled. But tonight her smile looked weaker, trembling at the edges. Her silver eyes were softer, wounded. Something was wrong. She sat on the floor as usual, but she didn't meet his gaze. Her hands twisted in her lap, restless. Finally, in a voice so small he almost didn't hear it, she whispered, "They... angry." His chest tightened. He knew exactly what she meant. Her people had found out. Lyra. He said her name carefully, as if the sound alone might break her. "If this is dangerous for you, maybe it's better if you don't come anymore." The words hurt him as he spoke them. Every syllable felt like tearing open his chest. For a long moment she said nothing. The silence was unbearable. Then slowly, she raised her eyes to his. They glistened with something raw, fear, sadness, but also defiance. "No," she said, firmly, shaking her head. "I come. I want to." He opened his mouth to protest, but she cut him off. "With you, I feel real." Her voice cracked, and she pressed a hand to her chest. "Not princess, not name, just me." The human's throat tightened. He could see it in her. This wasn't just rebellion or curiosity. It was truth. She was suffocating in her world of duty, and she came to him because, in his presence, she could breathe. He leaned forward, resting his hands on his knees. "Lyra, if they find out..." "They know," she interrupted, her voice trembling. "They tell me. I must stop. They say human is fragile, unworthy. But..." She looked at him, and for the first time tears shimmered in her silver eyes. "But when I am here, I feel alive." The words struck like lightning. He wanted to pull her close, to promise that everything would be fine. But the reality was heavier. Their bond was no longer just a secret comfort. It had become a crack in the walls that separated two worlds, and cracks always spread. Lyra crawled closer, her small frame trembling. She placed her hand over his, her smile returning, but this time it was fragile, broken at the edges. "Please, don't push me away." His breath caught. He remembered the warning from his officer, the whispers, the threats that hung in the air. But he also remembered the nights of silence before she came into his life, the emptiness that had consumed him. Slowly, he turned his hand and held hers tightly. "Then we face it together." Her smile widened through the tears, glowing despite the fear. And in that moment he knew, whatever storm was coming, neither of them could walk away anymore. The next nights were different. The air inside his quarters was no longer just warm with quiet companionship. It was heavy, filled with unspoken tension. He could see it in her eyes, in the way her fingers trembled when she reached for him. Something was pressing on her heart, and finally she let it spill. They were sitting together on the floor, their shoulders almost touching, when she whispered, "They want me to bond." He turned to her, confused. "Bond?" She nodded slowly. "Zari, families make bonds. Not love, not choice, agreement, blood and power." Her English was clumsy, but the pain behind the words was clear. "They choose for me, another Zari, not me, not my wish." The human's stomach twisted. He understood enough. It wasn't marriage as humans knew it, but it was the same idea. Binding. her future, her life, to someone else for political gain. A cage disguised as duty. Her voice dropped lower, raw with desperation. I said no. They said, I must. They say I am weak. That human makes me weaker. She looked at him then, silver eyes shining like glass about to break. But I am not weak. With you, I am strong. His throat tightened. He wanted to believe her, but fear gnawed at him. This wasn't just about her visits anymore. This was about her life, her family, her people, and somehow him. If she defied them, what would happen? Would they punish her? Exile her? Worse? He rubbed his face with both hands, trying to breathe through the storm in his chest. Lyra, this is bigger than us. If you fight them, you could lose everything, and me, I'm just... He stopped, the words choking in his throat. Just human. Just a man with nothing but empty quarters and a lonely heart. But she shook her head sharply. Not just you see me. You listen. You hold me when I am breaking. She reached out, her fingers curling around his wrist with a grip that surprised him. No one else does. The human's heart pounded painfully. He remembered the first night she had come, the way her smile had lifted the weight of his loneliness. He remembered her giggles, her quiet listening, the warmth of her hand in his. Could he really tell her to give that up? Could he bear watching her vanish into a life chosen by others? And yet, he knew what it meant to stand against worlds. Rules existed for a reason. Two species lived on a fragile line of trust. One wrong step could tear it apart. Was it right for them to risk so much for something as fragile and as powerful as this? Lyra must have seen the storm in his eyes, because she leaned closer, her voice soft but fierce. You are afraid. I am too. But listen, when I sit here with you, I feel free. Do you understand? Free. The word hit him like a blade and a balm all at once. Freedom. That was what she wanted. What he wanted too, though he hadn't realized it until now. Not duty. Not endless silence. Not cages made of steel or politics. Just the freedom to choose. He closed his eyes, torn between duty and the fragile heartbeat of something new. He could step back, obey the rules, let her go. That would be safe. That would be logical. But when he imagined his quarters without her smile, his nights without her quiet presence, the emptiness returned sharper than ever. When he finally opened his eyes, she was still watching him, waiting, trembling, holding, on as if her whole soul depended on his answer. His hand moved before his mind did. Slowly, carefully, he placed it over hers. Her fingers tightened instantly, as though she had been drowning and finally caught something to hold. He met her eyes, his voice steady, though his heart raced. If you want to fight this, then I'll fight with you. Whatever comes, we face it together. For a long moment, she said nothing, then her lips curved into that smile, fragile, trembling, but filled with fire. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she didn't look away. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his, whispering, "Together." And in that moment, he understood. The choice had already been made. The days that followed were not gentle. Whispers became louder. Eyes followed him in the corridors, sharp and judging. Human officers gave him warnings with cold voices, and the Zari soldiers looked at him as though he had stolen something sacred. It was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. One evening, the alarms in the corridor rang. He rushed to his door, and before he could even open it, soldiers pushed their way inside. Zari guards, their tall frames blocking out the light. Behind them, two human officers stood with grim faces, and in the center of it all, Lyra. She had been brought there, her hands held by the soldiers, her silver eyes wide with fear. She struggled against their grip, but they held her firmly. Her gaze found him immediately, desperate, pleading. "This must end," one officer said. His voice was stern, like steel striking the floor. "For her sake, for yours, for the Alliance." The human's heart pounded painfully. He wanted to speak, but his throat felt tight. He could see how shaken Lyra was, the way her hands trembled as she fought against the soldier's hold. She looked at him, her lips forming words without sound. "Don't let go." One of the Zari soldiers pulled her closer toward the door. "She belongs with her people," he said coldly. "Not with you." Something inside the human snapped. For weeks he had tried to balance between silence and defiance, between caution and longing. But seeing her dragged away as though she were nothing more than property, it shattered every restraint. He moved before he could think. "Stop." His voice rang louder than he had ever heard it, strong enough to freeze even the soldiers for a second. He pushed past the officer blocking him and reached for Lyra. His hand caught hers, and she clung to him instantly, her fingers tightening, as if her very life depended on it. The soldiers tried to pull her away, but she pressed herself against him, her small frame trembling. "Don't let go," she whispered again, this time aloud, her voice breaking. He wrapped his arms around her, shielding her against his chest. The soldiers barked orders. The officers shouted, but none of it reached him. All he could hear was her heartbeat racing against his. "Enough," one officer snapped. "You're defying orders, defying law, and risking the treaty we've bled to build." The human turned his head, his jaw tight, his voice steady. "And what about her? What about what she wants?" Silence filled the room. For a moment, even the soldiers paused. No one ever asked what the princess wanted. No one cared. Lyra's tears fell against his shirt, hot and silent. Her voice was barely audible, but it carried like thunder. "I choose him." The words were simple, but they were dangerous. A declaration. A spark thrown into a forest of dry leaves. The officers stiffened, their eyes full of shock and anger. The soldiers tightened their grips on their weapons. It felt like the entire station was holding its breath, waiting for the universe to split in two. The human outpost on Keleth Station was never built for comfort. The walls were plain gray, the corridors narrow, the lights too bright to ever feel like night. For most of the crew, it was just a place of duty, somewhere to work, finish a contract, and then return home. For him, however, it had become something heavier. Each passing day felt the same. Wake, work, eat, sleep. The stars outside the viewport were beautiful, but beauty is a poor medicine for loneliness. He often told himself he was fine. After all, he had his job, his responsibilities, and the endless noise of machines humming through the station. But at night, when the corridors grew silent and his room felt more like a cage than a home, the truth pressed against him. He missed Earth. He missed voices that laughed without calculation, people who smiled not because they had to, but because they wanted to. It was on one of those nights that everything changed. The door slid open with a soft hiss. At first he thought it was a mistake. No one visited human quarters without clearance. He looked up from the data pad in his hand, ready to scold whoever had wandered in. But then he saw her. Lyra. She was Zari, one of the alien race that shared the station with humans. Tall, graceful, with skin that shimmered faintly under the artificial light. Her eyes, large and silver, carried an emotion he couldn't name. She wasn't supposed to be here. Not in his room. Not in this way. She carried a bundle of tools in her arms, looking as if she had come straight from the engineering bay. But, before he could even ask what she was doing, the tools slipped. They clattered loudly onto the floor, scattering in every direction. The noise made him jump, but she just froze, staring at the mess she had made. For a moment, the air was heavy, with silence. And then, she smiled. It wasn't the polished, distant smile of a diplomat. It wasn't the polite curve of lips one gives out of duty. No, this smile was something else entirely. It was soft, nervous, and almost childlike. It seemed to break through the weight of the room, lighting it in a way no artificial lamp ever could. He felt something inside him shift. For months he had carried the heaviness of solitude, the dull ache of routine. But that smile struck through it all, reaching into the parts of him he thought had gone numb. He didn't know why. She was an alien, someone from a culture that looked at humans as partners in trade, not companions in life. But in that moment she looked more human than anyone else he had ever seen. Lyra crouched down, trying to gather the tools, her long fingers fumbling as if her hands shook. He wanted to say something, to help, to break the silence that now hung between them. But his throat tightened. Words felt too fragile for this moment. When she finally looked up again, still holding a crooked smile, he saw it. Loneliness. The same loneliness that lived in him. That same emptiness reflected in her alien eyes. And just like that, he understood. She wasn't here because of duty or politics or some mission she had been assigned. She was here because she was searching, too. Searching for something real, something unspoken, something human. He knelt down beside her, helping her collect the tools. Their fingers brushed, and though it lasted only a second, it left his heart beating faster. He didn't pull away. Neither did she. When the tools were finally gathered, she didn't leave. She simply sat on the floor, cross-legged, watching him as if he were the most fascinating thing in the galaxy. He tried to return to his datapad, but he could feel her eyes on him, and the corner of his mouth twitched into a smile he hadn't worn in months. That night, no words were exchanged. None were needed. The human sat at his desk, pretending to work, while the alien girl sat on the floor silently smiling. The cold walls of Keleth Station remained the same gray steel, but inside that small room everything had changed, because sometimes all it takes to break the silence of the universe is one smile. The next evening, when the human finished his long shift and returned to his quarters, he expected silence again. The station always felt heavier after work, like the weight of machines and duty pressed down harder in the quiet hours. He told himself the strange encounter with Lyra had been a one-time mistake, something that would never repeat. But when the door slid open, there she was. She didn't knock, didn't speak. She simply walked in with the same unshakable calmness, carrying nothing this time. And once again, she sat down on the floor as though it was the most natural thing in the world. No permission asked, no explanation given. She just smiled. That same smile. He stared at her, half in disbelief, half in curiosity. He should have reported her presence. After all, rules were rules. Humans and Zari weren't supposed to mix like this, outside of formal meetings or official work. But instead, he found himself setting his datapad aside and leaning back in his chair. "Why are you here?" he finally asked. His voice was quiet, almost hesitant, as though speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile moment. Lyra tilted her head, her silver eyes catching the faint light of the room. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, struggling. Her language, skills in English were still new, clumsy at times. At last, she said softly, "Here. Feels different. Different." The word hung in the air. He didn't push her further. Instead, he allowed her to stay. Hours passed like that. He worked on his reports while she sat on the floor with her knees pulled close to her chest, watching him. Sometimes she looked around the room as though fascinated by the simplest human objects. The cracked mug on his desk, the faded picture of Earth's ocean taped to the wall, the way he tapped his pen when he was thinking. Things that had become invisible to him seemed to sparkle in her eyes. When the silence grew too heavy, he spoke. He told her about the picture on the wall, the ocean he had once seen as a boy, its waves stretching endlessly. He spoke about music, about how humans sang not because they had to, but because it gave voice to feelings that had no other place to go. His words came slowly at first, but once he started, they kept spilling out, like water breaking through a dam. Lyra listened without interruption. She didn't nod just to be polite. She didn't look away or seem bored. Her attention was steady, pure, like she was collecting every syllable and holding it close. For a man used to being ignored in the endless grind of duty, it was disarming. When he spoke about laughter, about how sometimes humans laughed even when they were sad, her lips curved upward. "Strange," she whispered, though her eyes gleamed. With curiosity. "Strange?" he asked, amused. "Yes, laugh when pain." She shook her head, clearly trying to make sense of it. Then, to his surprise, she giggled. The sound was light, musical, and completely unguarded. For a moment, he forgot he was speaking to an alien. For a moment, she was simply a girl, finding joy in something she didn't yet understand. That sound struck him deeper than he expected. It was fragile, almost shy, yet it filled the whole room. He couldn't help but laugh with her, and soon the two of them were caught in a quiet rhythm. His laughter, her giggles, the silence between broken and remade into something warmer. The night stretched on until fatigue pulled at his eyes. He expected her to leave then, to return to her world where he did not belong. Instead, she remained seated, her gaze soft. "You, alone," she said at last, her broken English carrying more weight than perfect grammar ever could. The words hit him sharply. Yes, he was alone. He had been alone for months, maybe years if he was honest, and yet somehow she had seen it instantly. He swallowed, unsure how to answer. But before he could speak, she smiled again. That same gentle, glowing smile from the first night. Now, not alone. The words were simple, childlike even, but they wrapped around his heart like a promise. When he finally fell asleep at his desk, the data pad still glowing faintly, Lyra stayed. Quiet, unmoving, watching over him. And though the outpost beyond his door remained cold and distant, inside, his room a strange new warmth had begun to grow. For the first time in a long while, he did not dream of Earth's oceans or home. He dreamed of silver eyes, of quiet laughter, and of a smile that made the loneliness fade. Days turned into weeks, and still Lyra came to his room. At first, he thought it was a secret that would remain hidden forever. She never spoke much, never disturbed his work. Yet her presence was like a flame against the cold walls of Keleth Station. Each night she arrived, and each night she smiled. For him, that was enough. But the universe does not stay quiet when rules are broken. The whispers began slowly. His human crewmates noticed that he was less tired, less bitter. Some even saw her, leaving his quarters late at night. Their faces told him everything, the raised brows, the muttered words behind his back. Humans were curious, and curiosity always spread like fire. It was worse among the Zari. Lyra was not just another alien. She was the daughter of an important family, tied to politics that reached far beyond the station. To her people, humans, were partners in trade, allies in war, but never equals in blood. For someone like her to spend time with someone like him, it was unthinkable. One evening as he left the mess hall, an officer stopped him. The man's voice was low, sharp. "You need to be careful. People are talking. You know the rules. Keep professional ties, nothing more. If this continues, you'll lose your post here."